Reading through the four Gospels generally leaves us with a pretty consistent story of Jesus' life and ministry, especially in Galilee. Interestingly, the four Gospels differ widely in what they report concerning the risen Christ and his appearances. But instead of trying to harmonize them, better to read each story on its own and let each one stand on its own. That's what we'll do this week. We'll look at most of the appearances Jesus makes after his resurrection. All but two of these appearances are reported in the four Gospels. Interestingly, two are reported in the book of Acts. So let's be about it. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional from Monday, April 10th, 2023. The Gospel of Matthew is the longest gospel, but it contains the shortest accounts of Jesus and his appearances following his resurrection. In fact, Matthew only records two brief appearances. Of course, this doesn't mean Jesus only appeared just these two times, only that Matthew chooses these particular appearances to emphasize their importance. The first appearance is indeed very brief, surprisingly brief. It takes place almost immediately after the women find the tomb empty and encounter an angel of the Lord. The appearance of Jesus happens when they are hurrying to tell the disciples what they've just seen. To remind you, in the Gospel of Matthew, two Marys, Mary Magdalene and the curiously titled Other Mary, are the ones who go to the tomb early on the first day of the week. We assume from our reading of the other Gospels that they've come to prepare his body, for which there had not been time between his removal from the cross and his placement in the tomb. Remember, once the Sabbath began at sunset on Friday evening, such work was prohibited until after the Sabbath was concluded. Now, early in the morning on the day after the Sabbath, probably around first light, was the first opportunity to take care of this all-important task. Matthew records that when the women arrive at the tomb, there is an earthquake, followed by the appearance of an angel. After they receive instructions from the angel, they head back to report to the disciples. That's where we pick up the story. So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." As brief as this encounter is, let's pause and talk through it. The first thing to notice is the women's reaction to the angel's message. They leave the tomb with fear and great joy. Alone among the gospel writers, Matthew describes joy as part of their reaction. The other gospels variously describe fear, disbelief, amazement, and perplexity. But Matthew adds joy. It is as if he wants to emphasize the mixture of thoughts and emotions, as there surely must have been. Next, notice how apparently sudden and brief their encounter with Jesus is. "Greetings," he says to them. Did he say more than that? There's no way of knowing, actually. Might have, might not have. Matthew simply doesn't linger on incidental conversation. But it is worth noting that the Greek here, kairete, is a form of the word joy. It is the command form. It literally means, in this case, rejoice. This seems like a more appropriate way to translate the language here than the bland greetings. For indeed, rejoicing is the proper response to the resurrection. Next, the women fall before him and embrace his feet, a sign of worship. What is interesting here is what Jesus does not say. Unlike the account recorded in John, Jesus does not tell them not to hold him. Keep that in mind when we read John's account in the next few days. Finally, Jesus gives them direct instruction to tell the disciples to meet him in the region of Galilee. This is also a curious detail, for in other gospel accounts, Jesus meets the disciples in and around Jerusalem itself. But for Matthew, it is important that the disciples meet him in Galilee. Why? Well, we don't know fully, but it is clearly important for Matthew. Perhaps it is important for the disciples to return to where their original encounters with Jesus took place, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Just as they began their ministry there with Jesus, so they are to begin their new ministry there now that Jesus has been resurrected. That's only speculation, of course, but it seems to make sense of this. So this encounter between Jesus and the two women, brief as it is, tells us a lot. As with all four Gospels, it is the women who first bear witness to the empty tomb and the risen Christ. Joy is not only part of their reaction to what the angels have told them, it is the message of Jesus to them directly. And his message to the disciples through them reminds us that the job of bearing witness does not end on Easter morning. That's just the starting point, not only for the first disciples, but for us as well. Tomorrow, what Jesus says to the disciples when he meets them in Galilee. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.